This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new values, and a new experience.
Welcome to the G-Spot Podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us for conversations around sex, spirit, and all things self-care. All things self-care. All things self-care.
This is a journey into sound.
Uno, dos, tres, cuatro.
You are a G-Spot Podcast with Katie Silcox.
Hey, beautiful friends. It's Katie here. Mid-late February. That's where we're heading. And I want to start off today's podcast with a piece, a sutra from the Bhairava Tantra. You are stunned, powerless. You thought you knew what was going on. Now you realize you don't have a clue. You are stopped in your tracks. Everything within your skin is shaking. Enter the trembling. Right here in the midst of commotion, get curious. Look around inside with wonder. Unmind your mind. All the walls have fallen down. Go ahead and dissolve. The one who has always been, who has seen much worse than this, is still here. And that's my dear friend Lauren Roche's translation of the Radiant Sutras. Beautiful tantric text that asks us to embrace one of the most beautiful meanings of the word tantra, and that is tender, and to stay tender, and to stay curious, and to stay tender as life, as this sutra says in his beautiful, very liberal translation. You are stopped in your tracks. You are stopped in your tracks. You are stunned. You are powerless. You thought you knew what was going on, and now you realize you don't have a clue. And we begin today's podcast with that because we'll be talking today about death. And it's been a theme lately. The podcast before the last one was why your yoga practice may need to die. We've been talking about February as this time where the death is here, right? We've gone through the death. We are in what the Ayurvedic tradition and Hinduism calls Sutika. Sutika is a time period after a woman has a baby, so after birth and before birth, and at the moment of death and after death, there's this sort of 40-day window where the veil between matter and spirit is very, very thin. And if you've ever had a baby, you know what I'm talking about. Those days after having a baby, you're in a state of wonder. You're in that state where you thought you knew what was going on, but now you realize you don't. And I have definitely experienced this with death, right? We enter into a place where that veil that causes so much separation is temporarily thin. And it can be in those moments a time of great healing and great insight. And I bring this up because for me personally, there has been a lot of death around this past month. We lost one of our sisters in Shakti school. We lost her in a violent way, and the level of love that her mother, who remains, who's one of my close students and friends, was mind-blowing. And through this terrible incident, so much love was experienced and given and received, and so much insight, and of course, great grief. I was also listening to one of my favorite teachers and doctors. I mentioned him in last week's podcast, Dr. Zachary Bush. I was listening to him talk about actually soil health, which I mentioned last week. And Zach was a doctor in the ICU for a while. And he was saying that in the ICU, doctors are dealing with death every day. And he said it's not like on ER where you resuscitate people and they come back to life. It's a lot of slow dying. And when you resuscitate people, most don't come back to life. It's actually only about 6%. So he tells the story of our soil being depleted, and the way that, as I spoke in the last podcast, that Mother Nature is so loving and she can replenish the soil from its own death. And he was comparing it to this time that he spent dealing with the sick and the elderly and the dying. And he said, our culture doesn't have an experience, a visceral living experience with our dying, our death. It's sanitized. Most people die in white hospital rooms with clinicians and people wearing masks. And we don't have this living daily experience with death, whereas in India, they carry their dead through the street. They burn their bodies in public to show the reality of life. And we don't have this in our Western culture. And he said, I had the great honor and privilege of actually dealing and being with death. Dr. Zach got to be in that tantric state of Sutaka, this space where the veil is thinner. And you can tell in being with him, he has a wisdom that only comes from having spent time with the dying. And he said, there was this one day where, contrary to what normally happens, I was able to resuscitate 3 different patients in one night. And these 3 different patients were very, very different people. One was an African-American pastor who was very well known, and his hospital room was packed full of people and a lot of love and connection. And the other man was a man dying of AIDS. And the third was someone else. I can't remember exactly what the story was. But the point is, they were 3 very different people in 3 very different death circumstances. One dying of a terrible illness, one dying of old age, etc. And he said he was able to resuscitate, to bring back all 3 that night from the brink of death. And he said, it was astounding to me. Each one of these 3 people that were from very different backgrounds, when I was able to bring them back, to resuscitate them, that night, each of those patients said the exact same thing. And that was, why did you do that? Why did you do that? And he said, they told the story of very similar experiences, of being in light and going towards this light and having these similar death experiences with some variations. But the one thing that each of the 3 said upon, contemplating this taste of death was, I never have felt so accepted. And I think that we are all walking around longing to be accepted, longing to know that we're okay for exactly who we are in exactly this moment. And I think about the loss of our sister, who we dedicate this podcast to the memory of, Alexa. We love you. We're here for you. We feel you. We feel your love. To Kathy, we love you. And I hope that this can bring in this beautiful word, Sutaka, the charioteer of death, that brings us into this space where Mother Nature, who loves us so much, protects us on the front end and the back end of death. We have different chemicals in our body during that time period that enable us to have great, deep insight if we so choose. That's why we have to really care for people, not just after the dying, but especially 40 days later, when the rituals are over and when that period of spiritual sutaka may be waning. It's important that we take care of one another 40 days after the loss or after the birth. So all of us want to be accepted. What the Vedic teachings say and what Christianity says and what many traditions of mysticism say is that death is an illusion. Death, this thing that we're all so desperately afraid of, is actually just taking off one jacket and putting on the next, and hopefully a jacket that fits you better. Heaven is the state of feeling like you are totally accepted. Heaven is the state of feeling that you are totally loved. Heaven is the state of feeling that no matter what circumstances that you're in right now, no matter how hard life is, because guess what, guys? Life is hard, and death is a part of it. No matter what's going on, you are loved, you are accepted, and somehow it will change and work out. My minister here, Dr. Lee at the First Baptist Church here in Charlottesville, he said to us this Sunday, there's a difference in going through something and being in it. Being in it means I don't know when this shit's going to be over. I don't know how this is going to turn out. Going through it means I think there's a light at the end of this tunnel. I can see that I'm going to get through this. But being in it means I don't know. And that's really, guys, that's all of us. That's this sutra. You are stunned. You are powerless. Everything that you thought you knew, you realize you don't. Death is the great liberator. Death is the great equalizer. And Dr. Zach goes on to say, death, in fact, is the greatest expansion into the truth of what is actually real. And that is that we are totally accepted and we're in this together. And that's so beautiful. In this past month, not only did we lose our sister, but we also lost my best friend's mother-in-law died. And we dedicate this to her. We dedicate this to Pap, my partner's grandfather, died 4 days ago. We dedicate this to his memory and to all the love that he gave. And we just, ask that, and this is for you to practice, because guess what, guys? Death and taxes, that the only thing we can be certain of is that none of us are getting out of this alive in this body. And so when we have death in our lives, the thing that we can do is, according to tantric ritual and tradition, is to really pray for our dying, and as they die, but not only as they die, but after they die. The mourning period is as much about the death of the dying as it is for those who remain. So during this time, we can pray for their safe passage, praying that our loved ones can release themselves from this life. Often we get cords attached to the dead when we don't want to let them go and they don't want to let go. And so one of the things that you can do is just pray, to your ancestors, to your dying, to those who have died, go, be free. I'm okay. You're okay. I'm always with you in the realm of the heart, in this realm of the veil, the thinning veil. I hope that death touches your door in a way that it's touched mine this past month, in a way that is both terrifying but also leads to this great expansion. I wish you guys a beautiful February. We will talk next week about love. And I had planned a Valentine's Day theme, but we had a lot of death in my life. And I always like to try to keep these podcasts real. And I don't want to talk to you guys about sexuality and sensuality when I have death on my heart. And I hope that this can be useful for you, if not today, at some point in the future. Before we close, just a couple of announcements. We absolutely love our sponsor, and that's what lets us do what we do, which is give you guys free content on podcasts. We have a beautiful sponsor, and their name is Apothecary, Apothekary. That's apothecary.co, no M, just a CO. Check them out. They are a woman-run business. And the product that I want to feature of theirs today is an herb called shatavari. And that is an herb that is so important in the Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia. It's wonderful for helping a woman stay balanced through things like death, through things like menopause, through things like childbirth, through things like menstruation. It's a beautiful root that grows into the ground. And one of the funny names of shatavari, which means 100 roots, is she who has 100 husbands. And what it's referring to is this herb's ability to provide rejuvenation, vitality, sexual stamina, fertility to the person who uses it. And it's great for women and men. So we're going to provide a direct link to shatavari. I could literally do a whole podcast on shatavari, and maybe we should. But for now, we're going to provide you guys with a link. And I love this company. I trust their sourcing. Check that out. If you're not a subscriber to the podcast, please join us. Subscribing helps other people find us, and leave us a great review if you've gotten something out of this podcast. We also have a new Lineage of Love platform, which is a month-long subscription with me, where you get a video and an audio meditation and a lot of inspirational stuff every month for about the cost of a yoga class. So we're going to provide a link for that as well. We love you guys. Have a beautiful February, and we'll see you next week.
Beautiful.